Porque diga lo que diga, yo soy libre de pensar, porque siento que es la hora de ganar la libertad. Hasta cuando ya de abusos es el tiempo de cambiar, porque basta de miseria, voy a decir que no.
Porque nace el arco iris después de la tempestad, porque quiero que florezcan mis maneras de pensar, porque sin la dictadura la alegría va a llegar, porque pienso en el futuro, voy a decir que no.
Vamos a decir que no, con la fuerza de mi voz. Vamos a decir que no,
yo lo canto sin temor.
vamos a decir que no, todos juntos a triunfar. Vamos a decir que no,
Por la vida y por la paz.
terminemos con la muerte, es la oportunidad
De vencer a la violencia.
This is the world's biggest ocean. We are sailing on the Marco Polo in the vast Pacific basin. From island to island, green spots in all the blue. Here we arrive at Easter Island. The people come out to say hello to us in their boats. This is a Pitcairn Island where the same happened. Here we are in the lagoon of Gambier Islands, sailing with the locals. This is the island of Bora Bora, with the famous peaks which inspired the author of the musical The South Pacific. This is in the harbor of Papeete, Tahiti, where a local tuna boat comes in after trawling along the coral reef. This is a Cook Islander who explains about fishing on the island of Rarotonga. This is the island of Tubuai in southern South Pacific. This is another island, Raiwave, only a day's sailing from Tubuai. This is a low-lying atoll, Palmerston, the people advising us to drop the anchor. This is the Marco Polo in Fiji, anchored off the island of Taveuni. We are sailing around in the world's biggest ocean. Thousands of islands, people all over. Even the smallest and remotest place is inhabited. How did man discover all this? From where did they come? How did they find their way? On our voyage to the Pacific, we have been looking for answers to the questions. We have been climbing the rocks and cut our way through the forest to see what the ancestors left behind. Many, many years ago, the first people arrived in the Pacific Ocean. Since then, they populated all the islands in both the North and the South Pacific. Today, we will look at the migrations, the voyages which these people did. In Mangareva, we asked our friend Dominique Devaux to explain about the three different population groups which inhabit the Pacific Islands.
Nous pouvons d'abord définir une chose. Ici, dans toute la Polynésie, les ethnologues ont défini des limites du polynésien, de la race polynésienne, qui part donc de l'un des points du triangle polynésien et Nouvelle-Zélande, qui remonte en passant par Samoa, oui, jusqu'à Hawaï et jusqu'à Easter Island.
Ah oui.
Ok.
Tout ça.
Voilà.
C'est le triangle polynésien.
Parce que ici avec Fidji et donc Nouvelle-Guinée et le nord de l'Australie, c'est la Mélanésie.
Oui, Mélanésie, oui.
Et plus haut, nous avons Micronésie.
Plus haut ici.
Ici, c'est la Micronésie.
C'est les trois différentes races qui vivent
dans le Pacifique.
Dans le Pacifique. Oui.
Mais ils ont tous un point commun.
Oui.
Pour tous les ethnologues, le polynésien, le mélanésien et le micronésien sont ont tous des similitudes dans le physionomie, qui proviendrait de l'Asie.
Edmundo Edwards is one of the most knowledgeable people when it comes to the history of the Pacific. He has spent 22 years on Easter Island and done numerous excavations in the rest of Polynesia. We asked Edmundo what he could tell us about the origin of the Pacific people.
Okay, I'll tell you what we know. We don't know a great deal, but we know a little bit more than what we knew before. And this is in the year 1909. There was a Catholic priest that was working in the northern province of Bougainville, of the Bismarck archipelago, and he then found a site in the island of Botok, and this site had a tremendous amount of potsherds. And he started looking at this pottery. He asked the people of the island if they had ever made this pottery, if they knew anything about it. Nobody knew nothing. He published a report. It went sort of unnoticed because then the First World War started. And later on in the 1950s, two American archaeologists working in the northern area of New Caledonia, they found a site that had a very similar pottery, and the site was named Lapita because, and from then onwards, all the pottery that has these designs has been termed Lapita because the first site that was identified is that name. And well, in the last 20 years, there has been a lot of research, and they have found Lapita pottery. It extends all the way from the Bismarck archipelago to the Marquesas.
Aux îles Malaisie, il y a Rua, qui veut dire deux. Et je peux dire qu'ici, jusqu'à aujourd'hui, en mangalésien, deux, c'est Erua. Ici, hein?
Oui.
Par contre, encore une autre vraiment forte similitude, c'est 5. 5 aux îles Malaisie, nous disons Arima. À Tahiti, l'ancien Tahiti, hein? Arima. Ici, nous disons jusqu'à aujourd'hui Erima. Lima, c'est 5. Lima, c'est aussi la main, parce qu'il y a 5 doigts. C'est une très forte aussi similitude.
Well, the Polynesian is a Proto-Malayan sort of language. So the origin anyway is in Malaysia, and you have a great amount of words that are very similar. For example, if you go to the Solomon Islands and you ask them there the name for breadfruit and uru, what's it called, many trees, bananas and other things, and coconuts, you will find that they are exactly the same names as here or the Marquesas or Easter Island, because probably the origin is over there.
I see.
This is Tubuai, a beautiful island well to the south of Tahiti. Here we met Lawrence Miller, who is specializing his archaeological research towards finding Tubuai's past. He also wonders about the Lapita people.
Years ago. And we haven't anything like Lapita pottery in Tubuai, but I wouldn't be surprised. I quite feel that they could have easily passed through the Austral Ridge, the Austral group of islands, thousands of years ago.
Apparently these people were traders. They were taking some artifacts like obsidian from Great Britain, New Great Britain and Bismarck archipelago, and they were trading this obsidian all around the area. Probably they were also trading for pottery, and probably these people were the ones that introduced most of the cultivated species into the Pacific, like taro, breadfruit, sugarcane, and other things, because where you have the greatest amount of these trees or that have any economic value growing in the wild is in New Guinea, the Solomons, and Southeast Indonesia. So we suppose that those are the ancestors of the Polynesians and probably also the Melanesians, because it's not too clear yet if the Melanesians come from the same descent or not.
In today's Pacific, the outrigger canoe is commonplace. We see it all over, both for sports and for everyday use for fishing. The outrigger canoe is very much a part of Pacific life. But how did the ancient Polynesians get around between the islands, sometimes very long distances?
C'était des très très grandes pirogues.
C'est-à-dire que tu dis très grande. Qu'est-ce que c'est-à-dire? C'est comme 40 mètres ou 20 mètres avec 300 personnes?
Oui. Le père Laval mentionnait que la pirogue, les restes de pirogue qu'il avait vus, pouvaient avoir presque une centaine de pieds de longueur. Et la largeur, c'était très difficile de définir. Mais dans les anciens Mangaléviens disent qu'il y avait deux étages. Hein. Il y avait la cale qui était très grande et il y avait aussi le pont. Et qu'il y avait autant de personnes qui peuvent aller dans la cale que dans le pont.
Well, these people arrived into central Polynesia around 1,000 years before Christ, up to 1,600 years before Christ. And apparently the dates that they have now from the Bismarck archipelago all the way to Fiji are practically identical. So this expansion occurred in a very short period of time, probably not more than 200 years. And from there we have a deep cut in the newer dates, because the later dates we have is only 200 years before Christ in the Marquesas. So what happened between, let's say, 1,500 years and 200 years before Christ in this area? We know absolutely nothing.
I think we underestimate them. I think we underestimate them a great deal, because when you think that the Lapita people, if you like, at 3,500 years ago, spread. That pottery is found in the Philippines, in New Guinea, in Samoa, well, in Samoa maybe not, in Fiji, in Tonga, over a huge area. And if you look at the radiocarbon dates, very quickly, in 300 or 400 years, they managed to cover all that area. And we're talking about 3,500 years ago. Tahiti's known history, archaeological history, is only about 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And now you're talking about 2,000 years that's missing. What happened to that? And we're trying to believe that they didn't do anything for 2,000 years. They went everywhere in 300 years, thousands of miles, and then suddenly stopped. I don't think it's logical. I don't think it's at all acceptable. And I think that they were more capable, much more capable than we presently assume, in terms of getting somewhere and finding their way back.
Getting back, yeah. But there's an interesting thing, and that is that you have the Tonga Trench. And on that side of the Tonga Trench, the islands are rising. And on this part, they are sinking. And most of these people that were the ancestors of the Polynesians, they lived on the coast and sand dunes and close to rivers, and where you had good fishing in bays. And usually not very far away from good agricultural fields where they would be able to cultivate taro and other things. So if these islands are sinking more or less about 1 meter per 1,000 years, and we're looking for things about 3,000 years ago, we would have to look 3 meters deeper. And we would have to look then in the lagoon. And nobody has explored inside the lagoon. So that's why maybe we don't find these records in these places. So supposedly today we say from central Polynesia they went to the Marquesas, because the only place where we found ceramics is in the Marquesas. The ceramics that has been found in the Marquesas have been found in secondary context. They were not made in the site. It was taken there by somebody from another place. And they're all tiny little bits of pottery about this size, and the total number is 12 of the whole archipelago. So it's not much. But I'm sure that there must be here in Tahiti and other places older settlements that are under the lagoon.
If this is correct, many of the islands will have a history which is much longer than assumed until now. What would the history of a small and a remote island like Tupuai be in that case? What do we know about the early voyages over extreme long distances?
Maintenant, d'après l'histoire de Mangareva, pour aller à Rapa Nui, c'était très difficile. Ils prenaient un repère qui était une étoile dans le sud et ils allaient directement dans le sud. Arrivés vers les 30e latitudes, ils avaient des vents d'ouest et ils disaient toujours que la mer était très forte. Ils disaient Tai Oko, Taïoko, c'est mer dure. Et quand ils arrivaient à Taïoko, ils savaient qu'ils avaient le vent d'ouest. Et ils prenaient un autre repère. Arrivés à un certain alignement d'étoiles, ils savaient qu'il fallait remonter vers le nord. Et ils arrivaient à Rapa Nui, à Mata Kiterangi. Donc, c'était pas seulement des navigateurs, mais aussi des très bons navigateurs.
Now, why Easter Island and why go for south? Or in fact, why from central Polynesia? Because if these people were coming all the way across from, let's say, the Solomons into central Polynesia, they're all the time traveling in more or less the equatorial, a little bit south of the equator. But you're all the time more or less in the same direction with the same type of stars. And why suddenly would you go up to the Marquesas and then from the Marquesas way down to Easter Island? That we really don't know, but I have a friend that has a very interesting theory. He's an astrophysicist. His name is Malcolm Clark, and he worked for a long time with NASA. And he got interested in supernovas. And he discovered that there were some very large supernovas that occurred at the beginnings of the Christian era. And if you were, for example, in the Marquesas, and you gaze towards the southern horizon at night or at daytime, you would see that between 306 and 309 there were 3 supernovas. And these 3 supernovas were in the direction of Easter Island. And if you followed the supernova, because they were very brilliant, one of them, according to Chinese records, was about 6 times the magnitude of Venus. So it would be visible by day, by night. And if you navigated in that direction, he calculated all the paths with deviations, with currents and everything, you would arrive between 20 and dead spot on Easter Island.
I see.
And the same thing happens if you were in the Marquesas and you went around 500 AD north towards Hawaii, because there was a very large supernova there, and you would hit exactly Hawaii.
That's interesting.
So it is an interesting fact. I mean, thought we will never be able to prove it, but it is an interesting thought.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably a lot of evidence now to show that the first people arrived in New Zealand perhaps as early as 500 AD. Many people are saying this. And at 500 AD, that tool wasn't in existence in that form. So that means that it is a later form, and it's found in Tubuai, it's found in New Zealand. And I think the only explanation is that it was transmitted, that it was a result of actual inter-island communication between not only here, New Zealand, Tahiti, Hawaii, and the Marquesas, were probably 1,000 years ago, in a period where communication was commonplace.
Nous avons observé nous avons d'autres preuves, comme quoi que les communications entre Mangareva et île de Pâques étaient nombreuses, étaient sûres, parce que, par exemple, nous avons retrouvé des nacres à Pitcairn, des nacres provenant de lagon de Mangareva à Oeno. Nous savons que l'île de Henderson est habitée. Nous avons retrouvé des vestiges, des hameçons en nacre, des cailloux pour le filet et tout. Nous savons qu'elle est habitée. Il est très facile de croire, de penser que probablement c'est de Mangareva ou de Tuamotu. De toute façon, Mangareva avait d'énormes relations avec les Tuamotu.
This is something we haven't touched on, and I think probably the most important thing is that there's the trading in pearl shell probably could be an explanation for the whole thing. The people who were trading pearl shell out of the Tuamotus, they were known from the European times to have been the best sailors, the most adventurous, and perhaps the most business-oriented. They probably been sailing back and forth between the Marquesas, Tahiti, and the whole circuit from the very beginning, trading in these objects. And they might represent the cutting edge in the ability to get from one spot to the other. Because finding your way back to the Tuamotus, I mean, finding your way back to Tahiti is easy if you see the island. But the Tuamotus, I think, you have to literally crash on them before you find them.
That's right.
North of 30 degrees south, the wind would tend to be easterly almost all year round. South of 30 degrees south, we have the westerlies. This is why Lawrence Miller is fairly sure when it comes to the way of going eastwards.
If you look really, if you study the navigational routes between the Marquises, which if we already agree that they were there 2,500 years ago, there was movement between the Marquises and Tonga after the initial discovery, most certainly. And that the route there, coming back, goes through Tahiti, through the Society Island, through the Tuamotu, but once they get as far as Tonga, they'd be much better off to drift south and to come through the Austral route as far south as Rapa to get back to the Marquises. Otherwise, they're fighting headwinds the whole way. No sailor today that I know of will do it.
Well, we know today that the Polynesians probably had sufficient knowledge of navigation to permit them to leave from one island for several days and then return back to the same spot of departure. So it doesn't mean that when they were leaving with no sort of returning, because they could always return if they had sufficient food or the wind was favorable, of course, but most of the times they could return. Now, they were constantly exploring. They knew by experience that there was always lands towards the east, because all across the Pacific, as they had crossed, they had all the time found new land. Probably a lot of people were lost at sea.
Il est probable d'imaginer qu'il y a dû y avoir des centaines, peut-être des milliers de gens qui se sont perdus en mer.
Oui.
Parce que s'ils ont de la chance de trouver une île, ils arrivent là, il n'y a plus rien.
Non.
Là, il n'y a plus rien. Et probablement que des pirogues se sont perdues et les gens sont morts de faim avant d'avoir trouvé une autre île. Probablement.
Oui.
Nous pouvons imaginer ça très facilement.
Très facilement.
I think that they would have been very, very able, if you like, to know how far they had gone. Many people have said this. They didn't have any idea about where they were longitudinally, where as far as latitude, they had the stars, and they could find themselves very well as far as latitude goes. But I think they would have been very aware of the longitudinal distances as well, simply because they had traveled a certain amount of distance. You go, it's the same if you go in the bush, you've gone 2 miles that way, you've got at least 2 miles coming back.
On the other hand, you have, Thor Heyerdahl, he's a good friend of mine. He has a theory that came from Peru. It's true. You have beautiful walls in Vinapur that really resemble like Easter Island architecture. But on the other hand, you don't find any word of Quechua in the Easter Island language. You don't find a lot of techniques that these people used to use. For example, in all the coasts of South America, people used to know how to work obsidian. They would grab a piece of obsidian, and by pressure, they were able to obtain very fine tools, spearheads and scrapers and other things. And in Easter Island, they had the most wonderful obsidian mine, and they never learned how to work it with these techniques. So there were a lot of things that are lacking between South America and Easter Island. So I really don't see that there was any contact that way.
No.
Il est possible, peut-être même probable, qu'il y ait eu quelques embarcations qui venaient donc de l'Est, puisque le vent était portant, le courant équatorial aussi était portant. Mais ce qui nous fait douter, c'est l'origine de la patate douce. Nous savons que la patate douce est en Amérique du Sud et qu'elle n'a pas pu venir d'Ouest où il n'y en avait pas. C'est ce qui nous fait, c'est ce qui laisse un doute à une éventuelle relation avec l'Amérique du Sud. Hein. Ici, il y a cet instrument. C'est une herminette.
Ouais.
Alors, nous avons retrouvé le même genre, la même taille,
Oui.
eh bien, à Samoa. Cette herminette vient de Mangaleva. Elle est de Mangaleva.
Oui.
Il y en a plusieurs. Nous avons trouvé la même, avec le même matériau, le même caillou, ici, à Samoa. À Mangaleva, il est dit, nous l'avons vu, il y avait un marae qui s'appelait Tapu Tapuatea. Bon, nous savons, c'est très connu en Polynésie, que un des plus grands maraes de Polynésie est celui de Tapu Tapuatea qui se trouve à Raiatea.
Oui.
Hein?
Le même nom.
Le même nom. Mais nous n'avons pas ce genre de similitude avec l'Amérique du Sud.
Non.
Nous n'avons pas. Nous n'avons rien. Juste la patate douce. Mais contre des dizaines, des centaines de similitudes que nous avons entre ici l'Est et l'Ouest, nous n'en avons qu'une entre l'Est, donc l'Amérique du Sud et la Polynésie, seulement la patate douce. Alors c'est pour ça qu'aujourd'hui, tous les ethnologues sont d'accord pour dire que tout vient d'Ouest. Tout vient d'Ouest. Plus tard, nous trouverons peut-être comment est venue la patate douce.
Oui, peut-être.
Is it also possible that somebody may have reached from the Polynesian islands, may have reached South America?
Yes, I think so. Because when the Spaniards arrived to the southern part of Chile, they found that the Araucanian Indians had a small chicken, a fowl, jungle fowl, very similar to, well, chickens in Europe. And this chicken was very peculiar because it placed blue eggs, laid bright, brilliant blue eggs. And this fowl, the only place that you find it in the Pacific is in Southeast Asia, in Easter Island, and in the southern part of Chile. And this fowl, the Araucanians, to mark ownership, they would cut phalanxes from the 3 toes. You would cut like 2 phalanxes here, 1 there. And these were marks used by different families to be able to identify the fowls, because they were all the time in the wild, and when you got them, you could look at them and see if you were yours before killing them. And this system of marking the fowls exists in Southeast Asia, Easter Island, and the southern part of Chile. But the fowls couldn't have flown all the way from Easter Island to the southern part of Chile. So most probably some islanders made it to the coast of South America.
Oh, this is yeah, it's an interesting problem. After the Marquises, there's nothing. You go out there, you're probably going to get lost. But on the other hand, we're thinking in our own, with our own strategies, and I think actually that someone a long time ago managed to get all the way to South America and discovered the total distance. So that if you go east and you already know what, just keep going, you're going to arrive. That changes your whole philosophical outlook. Yeah. You're going to say, okay, I missed it, I didn't find it, keep going, I'll be okay. And I think once the fear of the total trans-Pacific migration is being, answered, I think then they would set out with a totally different, there wouldn't be that kind of attitude, if you like. No. So now I think there's probably another issue, is that they found all the islands. Every speck they found, and I think, so that probably indicates that they have more clues. Maybe they followed birds, maybe they had some infallible system that would direct them to land once they were within 100 miles of it.
Like wave patterns?
Something, because they managed to, every island has got some archaeological context on it. This thing that is really baffling is that many islands that really weren't suitable, that didn't have the resources, didn't have water, were still chosen as where they left artifacts, and there's proof that people were living there.
Yes, the vast Pacific was populated. Island after island was discovered by the people who mastered long-distance navigation without the tools we have today. People settled and built up their islands. The descendants of these people are still today living all over the Pacific. Though the mystery of the sweet potato's origin has not been solved, all modern science believes that the population of the island from Hawaii to Easter Island to New Zealand originates from the West, as we have heard many things point in that direction. There may have been occasional contact with South or even North America. Now we have heard about the voyages, about the migration around in the Pacific. But how did the people who settled live? What is known about their cultures, their customs? What did they eat? What did they grow? And what was it that made them migrate, as we have heard today? We'll discuss this in coming programs about the roots of Polynesia. Until then, have a good week.
Con la fuerza de mi voz es la oportunidad